So Mike, you taught in the Huntsville area before Common Core came along, and then you got to see what happened once it was implemented?
Yes, ma'am. I taught for 8 years at what you would call, today we would call it a low-performing school or a Title I school there in the Huntsville area. The last year I was in that school, we actually implemented the Common Core State Standard Math. And may I go on?
Yes, but I do want to say it's not called Common Core. They call it Alabama College Career and College Readiness.
Well, you know, there's a very, I'd hate to use the word deceptive approach to the kind of standards we're using, but right now we're using 100% of the Common Core State Standards for math and 100% of the Common Core State Standards for ELA, English Language Arts. What Alabama did when they requested a waiver to the No Child Left Behind Act is they admitted that they were using the Common Core State Standards with additions of special standards for math and ELA that Alabama actually added to the Common Core pot. I believe Alabama added approximately 14% additional math standards to the Common Core State Standards, rolled them up and threw them out there on the table and said those are Alabama College Career Ready standards for math. They added approximately 3% standards for the English Language Arts from Alabama specific into the Common Core State Standards for ELA, rolled them up and said those are Alabama College and Career Ready standards. So it's a very deceptive or deceiving approach, but approximately 26 states have used that approach, trying to get away from the term Common Core.
Right. It's very toxic.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, tell us what happened when these changes came. What did you see in the classroom?
Well, when I was there and we first started to implement the math standards, I noticed some things it didn't make sense to me. For example, all the teachers in the school, whether you're teaching an elective or you're teaching a core subject, you were going to be responsible for either the math or the reading scores for the kids in your class. Well, that was, you know, we're used in a Title I school doing whatever it takes to try to help our kids. I'm going to tell you, the teachers that teach in these Title I schools, they don't get enough recognition. And for the people that have never taught there, that think they understand what's happening, until you walk those hallways week after week, month after month, you cannot appreciate what those teachers are going through. They don't get enough recognition. But anyway, getting back to it, we were going to, every one of us going to be held accountable for every class we ran, no matter what we taught, we were going to be held accountable for math or reading. The other thing that became obvious to me is the discipline issue. For those that have taught in a low-performing school, they may recognize that, you know, some days we're just trying to keep it between the ditches. And if you're ever on your right side lane that day, you're doing fantastic on discipline. But when we started that year, all of a sudden the attitudes of the administrators just changed. It changed to where it seemed to be where they weren't going to do anything to the kids. Pretty much the kids had carte blanche to do what the kids wanted to do. And I'll give you an example. First couple of weeks of school starting, tardy bell rings, kids are supposed to be in their classes when the tardy bell rings. Normally you might see 2 or 3 kids out in the hallway, but they're running to class. I would say by the second to the third month of our school year, I was starting to see groups of 5, 10, 15, or 20 or more kids out in the hallway, and they weren't running to their class. They were coming in and out of the school, going to the bathrooms or wherever they were roaming, and really very, very little action was being taken against them. Security was frustrated. Security couldn't keep up with them. We even had police officers there in the school, and the frustration level was the kids are running the schools at this point in time. Another significant thing that happened that year when we implemented the standards were, we used to always say, what can we do for the kids? How can we?
Let me stop you just for a second. Let me just go back to this. Do you contribute that strange behavior of them not reporting to class on time because they did not like what was happening in their classrooms and that was what was keeping them out? Because Common Core is supposed to be so rigorous and it's supposed to be so great for kids. You'd think they'd love it. I mean, how do you correlate Common Core to tardiness?
I wasn't trying to correlate the Common Core to tardiness or actually just not showing
Behavior,
up. What I was trying to tie in was the attitude of the administrators doing everything they could do to entice the kids to show up and get involved to where the Common Core implementation would be successful.
Okay.
Was my point there. The environment also changed for how the administrators were looking at the teachers. It used to be, well, this kid isn't showing up for class, or this kid's not motivated to do their work, or whatever, because it's not a matter of intelligence, it's a matter of motivation with these kids. Well, all of a sudden, the entire environment changed to, it's not the kid's fault. What are you, as a teacher, what are you doing wrong to where this kid's not passing? Kid's not coming to your class and the kid's not passing in your class. What are you doing wrong? And you can see when you start to shift that whole philosophy of what's happening in the school, which is all tied into the transformation of our schools with the Common Core. It can have a huge impact on teachers, the teachers' motivation, their morale, and actually it gets to be somewhat intimidating right there. I would say that at the end of the year, they came and we were a traditional schedule, so we had 7 classes. Usually one period is a planning period, 6 periods are a class. And they came by every teacher's classroom and put these 6 charts out. It showed all the students in our classes, and it showed if we had met goal or not, either with reading or with math. So even back in the year 2012, 2013, we actually had the data system and the ability to track all the students on their assessments, as well as tie them into any teacher they wanted to. As you know, last year we implemented the English Language Arts standards, and this year we got them both running either the second or third year. The data last year, I'd like to point out, the data or these assessments are supposed to be used as evaluations to evaluate the teachers and the principals. Right now, the system is, they have the capability to do that. I was surprised at the state superintendent of education, Dr. Bice. I was very surprised at him and the State Board of Education last year standing up and coming out with this pretense of, we control Alabama's education, no one tells us what to do, and we're not going to use these assessments to evaluate teachers. Well, that sounded pretty good. Dr. Bice forgot to mention that Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Education, Department of Education up in Washington, had already said at the beginning of the school years, if the states did not want to use assessments to evaluate teachers last year, they didn't have to. So all that pretense with that resolution, I'm saying, what a bunch of cannon fodder. That's really not true. The Department of Education had already approved not using it. And for those people out there that don't understand why the Department of Education is important and what they say, why we have to listen, we are operating under the No Child Left Behind Act waiver.
Right.
Dr. Bice has signed off on that waiver, agreeing to comply with what the federal government calls 3 principles. One of them was obviously adopt college career ready standards. We're using Common Core state standards, which have a blank approval from the federal government. Right. The other one is to go into low performing schools and pull them up. And then the third one is to use assessments to evaluate the teachers and principals. Where I'm going with that is you will find that the teachers and principals have been able to get a buy on assessments and evaluations last year.
Right.
Alabama is in what I call the third window. They will probably get some kind of a buy in the year 2015, this year. But by 2016, they're going to be locked into evaluations based on the assessments of those kids. And why that is important is you'll hear some state board members say, well, these evaluations are just going to be these assessments are just going to be a part of the teacher's evaluation. Again, what Dr. Bice and others are failing to tell the public and the teachers. Arnie Duncan, Department of Education, when he sent down the approval letter to Dr. Bice to approve our waiver for the No Child Left Behind Act, he said these assessments will be a significant factor in the teacher's evaluation. And just about every teacher I talk to, they don't know that. They have no clue that how important these evaluations, how important these assessments are going to be in their evaluations. And then if you look at all the data we're collecting, and we haven't seen all the tests we're going to that are going to come out. We've got 5 more years to go to Alabama's Plan 2020. The year 2020 is very important. That's when everybody is supposed to be college and career ready.
But go back to No Child Left Behind.
Okay.
You were saying by 2014, we were told that under No Child Left Behind, everyone's going to be graduating.
Well, yes, under the original, under the No Child Left Behind Act, we were supposed to have 100% competency in reading and math by the year 2014. So that was a tremendous leverage for the federal government to use to encourage states to ask for that waiver and basically demand that the states comply with their 3 principles.
Right.
You can substitute the word principle for requirements, because if you did not agree to comply with those 3 principles, you were not going to get the waiver to the No Child Left Behind Act.
So what about, we're coming up on 2020, we've got 5 years.
Well, you can say anything 5 years from now, and what gets me is people are talking about Alabama college and career ready standards. They're talking about how great it's going to be. Everyone's going to graduate college and career ready. And they can say that. I can predict anything. I can say anything. It's 5 years from now. You can't disprove me. But what we ought to do is look at what they're doing with this data collection and what their plans are for all this data collection in the upcoming years. Because one of the things about implementing our Common Core agenda, if you will, is it is a slow rollout of various policies and plans that are aligned with college and career ready, which is the same thing to say as they're aligned with Common Core state standards, which is driving us to Plan 2020. Our data that's being collected is not only data that will be able to determine if a kid can add 2 + 2 and get 4, which I understand is somewhat of a challenge with the new math standards, but or pick out a verb or pick out a noun. But also the data we're collecting is getting into, I use a keyword, the word I use is profiling. We're starting to profile our kids with their career interests, aptitudes, attitude testing, psychological type testing that's going on. Parents are unaware of this. Again, we got 5 more years of various testing to come out and roll out. But where we're going to, where the rubber meets the road is, Alabama right now, the State Board of Education is trying to pass a new counseling plan. The name of it, I believe, is the Comprehensive Counseling and Guidance State Model for Alabama Public Schools, or it has a nickname, the State Plan. And if you look at this plan that's in draft format, but they're trying to get it approved this year, and again, this is where the rubber meets the road, the plan will address 3 domains. One is academic, one is career, and then the third one is personal and social domain. So they're starting to branch out into all 3 of those areas. And all the students will receive counseling, and the whole intent of all this data that we're collecting is by 2020, all students will be in the proper grade 8 placement. By 2020, all students will be on the proper pathway, career pathway, that the data says they would be most promising in.
So let me just restate that. What happens with your test scores in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 6th grade? Your parents may have gotten divorced that year. It was a rough year. Those test scores ultimately are going to lead you on the career path they think you should take.
It's more than academic tests. again, they're
Right.
starting to profile the kids. That's where we get, when we get into apples, oranges, pears, and potatoes, we can, they can easily, the proponents of Common Core can get us down on a rabbit trail that means absolutely nothing. They're collecting the data as we speak. The data, the kids are being tested. None of this data is going away. They say, well, it'll follow you to college or into the workforce. That's what they're saying today. How far will the data follow you 10 years from now when they change their mind and say, oh yeah, let's let the data follow you to the grave? They can say anything today for 5 years from now, anything. And that's pretty much seems to be one of their marketing
Control.
skills, because they can make it sound so wonderful. But one thing I would add, with this data-driven counseling program, with the counselors being able to, based on the data, help pretty much choose the career pathway for a student and put them on the right spot, if you will, or classrooms by grade 8, and map out a 4-year plan for them, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. All this while they're toying or trying to facilitate that now. By 2020, that's going to be locked in if we don't make a change. One thing I would like to add to that, there are countries over in Europe that use similar educational models, because when we talk about the education, we're talking about totally transforming the educational model we're using, not just here in Alabama, but in pretty much most of the states in our country. Where there are states over in Europe that use a very similar educational model, and I'll name a couple of the countries over there. Italy, France, Spain, England. Do you know the name of their educational model? It actually has an
Common
official
Core.
That's the correct name. It's actually called Common Core. So if you think the federal government is interested in change, yes, they are. If you think Common Core, the transformation of our state and our country's educational system would be where it's at without the leverage and the funding from the federal government, it wouldn't have gotten off the ground at the level it's at right now. But it's almost a mirror approach to like our health care. If you like your health care, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health care, you can keep your plan, and your rates are going to go down. They won't go up. Well, maybe they can say that over in France. Maybe they can say that over in England or Italy. But we saw how it turned out over here in our country.
Right.
It turned out totally wrong for us. And we're trying to hopefully we will get that corrected for our people. But our education is where we got all our eggs in one basket. If we lose education, issues that affect immigration, issues that affect gun control, issues that affect marriage, just about any issue you bring up will be impacted. And quite frankly, I feel the kids will be indoctrinated to have a certain attitude towards these value systems. I'll give you an example. One of the competencies under the new counseling plan is respect alternative points of view. Another competency that they have in the new counseling plan is recognize and respect variations in family configurations. Recognize and respect variances in family configurations. So they're starting to step over into parental rights. The parents have a choice. They can step up and start to demand that their elected officials repeal Common Core and stop this transformation of our educational system. And please don't let your elected officials get away with saying, that's not my job, that's the State Board of Education's job. The State Board of Education gets their power from the legislators. The legislators are obligated by the Alabama Constitution to protect us. And they're the ones that give the funding to the State Board of Education. Don't let your elected officials sidestep that issue. Hold them accountable.
Now, Mike, you do a lot of speaking and trying to make parents and teachers and community members aware of what's going on. What are some of the tips or suggestions that you give to people on what they can do to stop this train?
Well, I pretty much gave it about a moment before you answered that question. At least my viewpoint, if people really understand what is happening, if they understand the facts and not the spin, because there's a tremendous
Right.
marketing program out there with the spin of how wonderful education's going to be 5 years from now. One thing I will tell you, just as a side note, no one's talking about money right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this doesn't happen for free. But where since I operate on a shoestring budget, my viewpoint is the more people we can make aware of the facts, hopefully the more will go out there and make their elected officials aware that they know the facts and they demand action by the legislators. I think the legislators have had a free ride. They're trying to sidestep this issue and they're trying to put it all on the State Board of Education. And rightly so, the State Board of Education has failed in its job to protect our educational system here in Alabama. But our legislators control the State Board of Education.
What are some of your favorite resources? Where do you go if someone's brand new? This is the first time they've ever heard about Common Core. What are some of the resources that you like to use? Or
I go to the State Board of Education. I go and look up their documents. I download the documents on a thumb drive. I take them over to either Staples or Office Depot, and I have them printed out, and I go through every single page. I index the issues that bother me, research them. So if I go out and I speak to a group of people and they ask me, well, gee, that's Mike Parsons, what does he know? I don't want people to think this is just Mike Parsons. I want them to understand this is what your state plans actually say. This is where we're going, people. One of the major advantages is most people do not understand what is planned for the future. And quite frankly, most people aren't going to go and download those documents and read them.
right.
I suspect many of the legislators, as well as some of the people on the State Board of Education, really don't understand what is happening. They know the talking points. But you peel back the onion and start getting into the detail. They really just don't know.
Okay. Can you guys think of anything else? Any other? Do you have any stories from when you were teaching, or how did test scores change from the years before Common Core came in? Then Common Core comes in. What were the test scores like at the end? Were the kids doing better? Were they doing worse? Do you think they were getting it, or?
I will tell you, if I may, not on the assessments, because I think right now, the schools have had the opportunity, at least in my school, where I was at, where they could, if the kids did well on an assessment, they could use that as a final grade.
Oh, okay.
But if they didn't do well, they didn't have to use it. So they were doing everything they could to promote and show a positive impact on the Common Core. I do believe there's a tremendous amount of pressure to manipulate the data to try to have as most favorable outcome as they can possibly have with the students. They're trying to market this as a success story.
Yep, definitely.
And I'll speak in just one more point. I will say, I can't remember if I mentioned it before, but I do believe there's a lot of teachers that have issues with what they're seeing happen in the schools right now, but they dare not say anything. You can say, well, a teacher's going to stand up and do what's right. I believe they will do what's right to a point, but
If they're going to lose their job, it's a little bit harder.
they're there to put bread on the table and butter on the bread also, and many of them, bless their hearts, are the salt of the earth, but they have to stay quiet. I would also like to add one other point. And this is starting, why I say we're starting to get into 1,000 rabbit trails. But I do believe there's some types of mental health issues with the standards, and I'll tell you why. When I got engaged in this over a year ago, I was surprised at the number of parents I ran into that had kids usually in the 3rd and 4th grades, and it was usually math. And by the spring of the year, they were starting to see behavioral problems with their kids. And the families that could, that had the family structure that were, so they were able to pull them out of school and homeschool them or else send them to a private school, they've done that. But you know, the sad part is there's many kids out there that's in a family structure where their parents can't do that. They've just got to stay where they're at and try to handle it. Now, the reason I focused on 3rd and 4th grade is that's where they popped up. I've actually talked to people that work for media concerns up there in Huntsville and heard me mention 3rd and 4th grade, by the spring you start seeing behavioral problems. I've had parents say, well, they put their heads down on the table, they start crying, they were motivated, now they're not motivated, they don't want anything to do with school. Their whole attitude's changing. 3rd and 4th grade, we're starting to see that. I don't believe it's as great or has such an impact in the middle schools, especially in the high schools.
Well, they have that developmental, they've already learned the basics, and so now we're talking the little kids who.
But even now with the Common Core state standards, as you know, they were never tested.
Right.
We are the test bed. We haven't seen the effects, psychological effects that's going to have on our kids when some of them that started out when the math standards were implemented 2.5 years ago, or the math and English standards were implemented last year. We haven't seen the full effects of how that's going to affect our kids when they actually graduate.
Right.
When they get to 12th grade and graduate.
Yeah.
We haven't seen it.
Yeah.
We're guessing.
We're the guinea pigs.
We're playing Russian roulette with our kids, all for the sake of big money, because this is a big money deal.
Right.
There's a reason the BCA is supporting Common Core.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, yeah, here are other guys there.
Here we go.
Mike, thank you so much for speaking out all over the place and trying to help parents and just community members become aware. And I know you put a lot of time into your research and to your reading, and we really appreciate it. And thanks for spending time with us today.
Well, I don't do it for me. I've got my education, but I love my country. I love my state.